Merci beaucoup. Oral questions. Questions orales. The honourable member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, Vice Admiral Mark Norman served his country with distinction and deserves every opportunity to defend himself. And the Liberals have done everything they can to deny this right. The Prime Minister has refused to release documents needed for the defense case. And now we know that code names were being used to evade access to information laws within the ministry. And today now we've learned, Mr. Speaker, that the former president of the Treasury Board has withheld personal emails from Mr. Norman's lawyers. My question for the Prime Minister is, when did the Prime Minister know that the minister was withholding personal emails in this case?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, it would be inappropriate to comment on this matter before the court. The Sub Judice Convention indicates that MPs should refrain from discussing ongoing legal proceedings. Courts are dealing with the handling of evidence, and we respect the judicial independence and the House of Commons rules.
The honourable member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, a minister of this Prime Minister's government is withholding personal emails from the lawyers of Mark Norman. In October, the former minister said that the only contact he had with Irving was being copied on a letter, but there would appear to be copious documents that are relevant, and as a result, he's lawyered up to try to work his way out of this cover-up. Yeah. This is all very concerning, and it lies at the feet of this Prime Minister. So once again, when did the Prime Minister learn that his minister was withholding personal documents relevant to the Mark Norman case?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as we all know, these are matters before the court right now. The court is engaged in it, and we know that in Canada, the independence of our judicial system is something that must be a bedrock of our society and indeed of our functioning as a society and as a parliament. We respect the independence of those courts. We will allow the courts to do the job they need to do.
The honourable member from Milton.
Speaker, it's the end of the month, and in the normal world, families are taking a look at their personal budgets and trying to figure out how they're going to balance their own, because they know, unlike the Prime Minister, that budgets don't balance themselves. And they also know that if they're short this month, they just can't borrow their way out of debt, unlike the Prime Minister, who thinks that the country can. And finally, Canadians know that they will be the ones paying for the mistakes of this government and this Prime Minister. So, at the very least, Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve a clear answer before the election. Will the Prime Minister impose massive tax hikes on these Canadian citizens?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, our plan has been to lower taxes for the middle class and raise them on the wealthiest 1%. That has been an issue for the Conservatives because we know that they prefer to give tax breaks and advantages to the wealthiest. Well, unfortunately, that approach for 10 years under Stephen Harper didn't work to create any more than anemic growth. And what we've been able to do by investing in Canadians, investing in their communities, is give the lowest unemployment rates in 40 years and see Canadians create 800,000 new jobs. We're going to continue to invest in our communities because our plan is working to grow the economy for the middle class and those working hard to join.
Honourable Member for Richmond-North-Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, thanks to the former Conservative government's excellent financial stewardship, this government inherited a balanced budget. Today, 80% of Canadian families are paying more taxes because of the Prime Minister's out-of-control spending. And yet, in the last election campaign, he swore he would balance the budget before the end of the first term. So my question is simple. Will the Prime Minister table a plan to balance the budget without any further tax hikes on Canadian taxpayers? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the plan that we presented to Canadians in 2015 involved investing in Canadians, investing in communities, and creating economic growth. This is after 10 years of failure under the Harper Conservatives. We created a strong and growing economy. Canadians created 800,000 new jobs in the last 3 years, and we continue to see the lowest unemployment rates in decades. We will continue to invest in Canadians to create more prosperity for the middle class and those working hard to join it. The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, here's the reality. This government spends, spends, and spends on the backs of our children and grandchildren. Who will have to pay for that? Who will have to pay for the failures, mistakes, and the out-of-control spending of the Prime Minister? Well, it's the workers, business owners, and parents of Canada. So I'll repeat my question to the Prime Minister. Yes or no? Will he table a plan to balance the budget without increasing taxes on Canadians? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we did not increase taxes and we will not increase taxes on Canadians. On the contrary, we are the ones who lowered taxes for the middle class. We did so by asking the wealthiest Canadians to pay a little more tax. That's what shocks Conservatives. Because from the very beginning, they have been promoting economic growth by giving more benefits and advantages to the wealthiest in order to create economic growth. But that doesn't work, Mr. Speaker. Trickle-down economics doesn't work in Canada or elsewhere, and that's what they don't understand. We created economic growth by investing in the middle class, and we will continue to do so.
Our New Westminster Burnaby.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister misled Parliament and all Canadians when he said in this House that he has, and I quote, already helped over 1 million Canadians find affordable housing. We checked the CMHC record, and it says only 14,703 new units have been or are even being built. So this government gave away $14 billion in corporate tax write-offs in the mini-budget, but has only built a few new units of housing. Why is the Prime Minister deliberately misstating the facts? When will a government find new affordable housing for Canadians?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve housing that is safe, affordable, and accessible. That is why we have made unprecedented investments in housing across this country since day one, including with our national housing strategy. We have already helped more than almost 1 million Canadians access homes. Our plan is for stable housing and financing now and for the next decade. We know that quality of life, the better opportunities for kids, for families, for everyone relies on housing. That's why we're investing in a national housing strategy.
For New Westminster Burnaby.
Let's be clear, doing routine repairs and maintenance is not finding new housing for Canadians. And that answer shows appalling disrespect for Canadians in Burnaby and everywhere else that are suffering through the worst housing crisis we've ever had. Canadian families are struggling under the worst family debt crisis in our history and in all the industrialized world. 46% of Canadians are $200 away from financial insolvency in any given month. Why doesn't this government build affordable housing? Why doesn't this Prime Minister start to care as much about Canadians as he does about Bay Street billionaires?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that the NDP be careful about maligning the idea of repairing and refurbishing existing housing stocks. Far too many Canadians live in housing that is unacceptable, and the investments we've made that have helped rebuild, refurbish, renovate, improve housing for Canadians right across this country is making a real difference. That is part of the money we are flowing to communities, to Canadians, to make sure they have safe and affordable places to live. Yes, Mr. Speaker, there's much more work to do. But, Mr. Speaker, we are doing it with unprecedented investments in housing.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, according to a study, nearly half of Canadians are just $200 away from being unable to cover their monthly expenses. Sophie, one of my constituents, told me how hard it is for her and her mother to get through the month. People are facing crushing personal debt, but the Liberals are focusing on giving big companies billions of dollars in gifts. When will the Liberals start really helping ordinary people instead of helping the richest companies? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, our priority was to invest in the middle class and those working hard to join it. That's why we lowered taxes for the middle class. That's why we delivered the Canada Child Benefit, which is lifting hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty all across the country. We invested in a national housing strategy that has already helped nearly 1 million Canadians find housing. And we will continue to invest in our communities, to invest in Canadians, to help them build a better world for them and for their families. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's list left out the seniors of Canada who are in debt. Paul, a senior in my riding, told me that it's extremely hard for him to make ends meet at the end of the month with a tiny pension, even though he and his wife worked their whole lives. There's also a serious lack of affordable housing for seniors all across the country. So instead of spending billions of dollars on a pipeline and helping out big businesses, why would the Liberals help our seniors instead? Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about everything that we've done for seniors, including through the National Housing Strategy, because there's an aspect there that focuses on housing for seniors. In addition to that, we brought the age of retirement down to 65 after the Harper Conservatives brought it up to 67. And we increased the guaranteed income supplement for the most vulnerable seniors by nearly $1,000. We're continuing to work to fight the challenges that our seniors face, and we are there for them. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, it's been more than 3 years, and Canadians are still waiting for the Prime Minister to keep his election promise, which was to get to zero deficit by 2019. But that's clearly not the case. 2019 is the year where we have a $30 billion deficit. Now, the Prime Minister is probably the only person in the world who thinks that budgets balance themselves. But Canadians know that they don't. They know that, on the contrary, if you run a deficit, you have to pay for it one day. What is the government's plan to balance the budget? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Canadians had a choice between the Conservatives and the NDP, who promised austerity and cuts at all costs. We knew that after a decade of failed economic policies under the Harper Conservatives, that we had to make the right kind of investments for Canadians. And by doing so, Canadians have created over 800,000 new jobs. We have the lowest unemployment rate in 40 years, and a typical Canadian family is $2,000 better off. We know how to grow the economy. We're not going to take the same approach as a failed Conservative economic plan.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Well, maybe the member should say that to the 80% of Canadian families who are paying more in taxes than they were before the Liberals came to power. I'd like to see all of those Liberal candidates in a few months telling their constituents, well, look at us, we kept our promises. It's not true. Liberals don't keep their promises. Now, Canadians want to know, what is the government's plan to balance the budget? Do they at least have a plan?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we committed and kept our promise to grow and invest in Canadians, to grow the economy for the middle class and those working hard to join it. We did not take on the same economic plan as the Conservatives because they couldn't manage the economy to help create a more prosperous economy for everyone. All they did was focus on their millionaire friends, but we are focused on Canadians, and we know our plan is working because, Mr. Speaker, when you invest in Canadians, they create the economic success that we're seeing.
Order. I would ask members to listen to both questions and the answers. The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Millionaire friends? There's the millionaire friend right in the front row who inherited a big multi-million-dollar family fortune, as he likes to call it. And he says, you've never had it so great, fellow Canadians. Well, for those with family fortunes, that's true. For people who are struggling to pay their bills, who have lost their children's fitness tax credit, their transit tax credit, their textbook and education tax credit, the costs have never been so high. Why won't the Liberals admit, if given another chance, they will raise taxes just like they've already done?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to relay fake information, but the fact is that we actually lowered taxes for the middle-class Canadians. We lowered taxes for small businesses. We increased benefits like the Canada Child Benefit. Mr. Speaker, when will the Conservatives finally tell the truth and say that they're taking their marching orders from Premier Ford, and we're going to see more and more cuts across this country, like cuts to education, cuts to Franco-Ontario language rights? Why won't the Conservatives be honest and tell Canadians the cuts they plan on making?
The member for
election platform, do to all of Canada what Kathleen Wynne did to Ontario. She doubled the debt, she doubled power rates, driving the poorest people to the food banks, and she lied about her plans to raise taxes after every single election that she won. Does that remind you, anyone? Someone sitting right there in the front. He knows that he will do exactly what the Wynne Liberals do. That he will hide his plan, and he will raise taxes massively, and it will cost Canadians a fortune. Why won't you admit it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Order.
Mr. Speaker, look at our record over the last number of years. We've actually cut taxes. So, Mr. Speaker, they're talking about hypotheticals, but the record shows that we've reduced taxes. We've reduced taxes on the middle-class Canadians. We've reduced taxes for small businesses. Mr. Speaker, it's clear, the fact that the member from Carleton is speaking about Ontario, that he just wants to create a nationalized plan of the Premier Ford cuts. That's what the Conservatives' platform is. Mr. Speaker, when are the Conservatives going to be honest with Canadians and tell us what they plan on?
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, there's the latest defense. Now their plans for higher taxes are hypothetical. In other words, we get to find out about it after the election, when the Prime Minister no longer needs voters, but still needs their money. Mr. Speaker, Canadians without trust funds and family fortunes know what he has failed to realize, that never-ending and ever-growing deficits lead to higher taxes down the road. Why won't he tell the truth about that now instead of hiding it until after the election?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it's simply not true. A typical Canadian family is $2,000 better off under our plan than under the Harper Conservatives. That's real money in the pockets of everyday Canadians that need it. The Conservatives talk about all their austerity and cuts, and let me talk about the Canada Child Benefit. Over 16,410 children are benefiting in the member's riding alone. Is he going to look those children in the face and take that money from them just to prove a point? Mr. Speaker, we believe in investments. Conservatives believe in...
The Honourable Member. Order. Honourable Member for Carleton.
To the contrary, when we created the child care benefit, we did so with a balanced budget and we lowered taxes. By contrast, when they brought in their changes, they did so by raising taxes on those children's parents and bringing up more and more debt for those children to pay down the road. We, on this side of the House, will create a financial environment that is secure for Canadians so that we can keep taxes low. We have a motion before the House. It simply asks the Prime Minister to commit in writing that he will not raise taxes. Will he do?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we've already cut taxes, and the member opposite talks about the Canada Child Benefit, which they taxed. We, on the other hand, made it tax-free. Mr. Speaker, we continue to make the right kinds of investments. We're focused on Canadians, and Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, a typical Canadian family are $2,000 better off. We know across this country, and with the decade under the Harper Conservatives, we know what Conservative cuts look like, and Canadians voted against it.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
We're in year 4 since the Prime Minister issued a mandate letter to the Health Minister directing her to lower prescription drug prices for Canadians. This was important because Canadians pay among the highest drug prices in the world and millions can't afford their medicine. Now, officials at the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board admit that they have abandoned their plan to reduce the prices that drug companies can charge Canadians. Will the Liberals admit that they have folded and betrayed Canadian patients because of pressure from the pharmaceutical industry?
Minister of Health.
We recognize that Canadians should not have to choose between buying groceries and paying for medication. And that's why that this government has taken action. As the government, we have joined the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, where we're able to bulk purchase drugs with all provinces and territories. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, we have saved billions of dollars. Also in Budget 2018, we were pleased to launch the Advisory Council on the implementation of a national pharmacare program. We expect that report in March or in the spring of this year. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
For Vancouver Kingsway.
Well, the reality is Canadians are choosing between medicine and their rent, Minister. You know, the Liberals promised these reforms in 2016, and they said they'd be in place last year. This is a straight betrayal of a clear promise. But the Liberals also said that these changes were essential to bring in universal pharmacare, that we couldn't have it until prices were reduced. Well, that's not happening. With Eric Hoskins soon to release his study on pharmacare, can Canadians expect to see the Liberals once again cave into the drug lobby and refuse to bring in universal, comprehensive, and public pharmacare?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unlike the NDP, this side of the House wants to have a plan. And that's why that we've introduced the launch of the Advisory Council of a national pharmacare program. We are pleased that this council is being led by Dr. Eric Hoskins and a group of stellar Canadians to really look at this issue. I'm looking forward to receiving the report in spring of this year with the recommended options and also a path forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Daubignières. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government has totally lost control of the issue of illegal migration to Canada. They've spent another $115 million to deal with illegal migrants at the border. Why? Because of this Prime Minister's mistake when he threw open the doors to migrants in a January 2017 tweet. Mr. Speaker, when will this Prime Minister secure our borders and stop making Canadians pay for his mistakes? The Honourable Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs. Mr. Speaker, the alarmist comments from my colleague continue to ignore reality. The number of border crossings is decreasing. We do understand that Quebec and Montreal are playing a key role in partnership with our government to deal with temporary housing. The partnership with the government of Quebec is very important to us, as is the issue of border security. We will continue to work with our partners to ensure that we do both at once.
Member for Markham Unionville.
Yesterday, Liberal government announced another $114 million for illegal border crossers. Yesterday, Liberal also closed the application window to sponsor parents and grandparents in just 10 minutes. Under this Prime Minister, if you're illegally entering the country, you get immediate entry to Canada and free hotel rooms. If your grandmother trying to legally enter the country, you get the door shut in your face. Why is the Prime Minister making Canadians pay for his mistakes?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
It's amusing to watch the Conservatives pretend to care about family reunification, because under their watch, parents and grandparents were stuck in a backlog of 167,000 people, and they had to wait 7 to 8 years to reunite with their family members. We've slashed the wait times down, we have ended the backlog, and we've quadrupled the number available for Canadians and permanent residents to reunite with their families. So while the Conservatives are busy dividing Canadians, we're focused on reuniting families, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
What is shameful to watch is this government allow over 40,000 people to illegally enter our country and abuse our asylum system.
Shameful.
What is shameful to watch is this government use language to divide Canadians as opposed to using strong policy to restore order and compassion to our immigration system. They shut the door on parents and grandparents who are trying to legally enter the country yesterday. Why is this Prime Minister trying to make Canadians pay for his immigration mistakes?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
The facts speak for themselves. This is the Conservative position on parents and grandparents. The Conservatives described parents and grandparents as, quote, a burden on the federal government in terms of financial support. They have described parents and grandparents as a drain on provinces. That is their position. They can run, but they cannot hide from that position. We are responsible for quadrupling the number of spaces that parents and grandparents have to come to Canada. We'll continue to reunite more families. I'm amused by their newfound passion for reuniting families, but when they had the chance, they failed.
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Yesterday, the government announced $114 million for people who are illegally entering the country. Hotel rooms, immediate work permits, social welfare payments, and at the same time, they shut the door in 7 minutes for people who are trying to legally enter the country. There are over 9,000 angry comments on the immigration website from people who are saying this is not fair, because it's not. It's not right. Why is the Prime Minister trying to make people pay for his immigration mistakes?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
That suddenly the member opposite has found some sort of light where she's found some enthusiasm for family reunification. But family reunification was never their priority. Families had to wait between 7 to 8 years to join their loved ones. They only had 5,000 spaces to reunite family members. They had a backlog of 167,000 people stuck in that program. They even tried to hit the delete button, where for 2 years under their watch, Canadians couldn't sponsor. We're focused on getting the job done. They'll continue to.
Honorable député de Jonquière.
The honourable member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, it's been a long time since the Liberals have said anything about the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum. But recently, a Russian aluminum company managed to get itself taken off the U.S. sanctions list. No more tariffs for them. What do the Liberals have to say to the people here at home? In Jonquière, thousands of families are affected, and thousands of good jobs are at stake. They have a right to know, what have the Liberals done to get rid of the tariffs on steel and aluminum? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my colleague that the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum coming from Canada are unfair and illegal. And Canada is working against those measures on NAFTA panels and on WTO panels. I spoke to Ambassador Lighthizer today about this issue, and yesterday too, and we're still working on it.
Mr. Speaker, it's not enough to talk to them. You have to do something now. On Sunday, the U.S. administration lifted sanctions on the Russian aluminum giant Rusal. Meanwhile, Canada is still slapped with Trump's tariffs that are hurting Canadian businesses and jobs. So let me get this straight. Trump is saying Canada is a national security threat, but Russia isn't? Canada is the closest trade and security partner that the U.S. has. Canadian workers are tired of paying the heavy price of losing their jobs because this Liberal government won't stand up for them. What is the plan to remove these devastating tariffs?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, as the member from Essex knows very well, we are not just talking when it comes to the illegal and unjust U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum. We acted decisively on July 1st by imposing retaliatory tariffs, the highest, strongest retaliatory trade action in Canadian history. This action is having results. In fact, just this week, Kevin Brady said in the U.S. that he did not see how the U.S. could ratify NAFTA while these tariffs were still in place.
For Cloverdale, Langley City.
Mr. Speaker, we can all agree that every First Nation child deserves the best start in life. We know that the path forward includes First Nations control of First Nations education and long-term sustainable funding. Can the Minister of Indigenous Services please share with the House the great news from British Columbia that advances this important priority?
Good. Honourable member from Cloverdale, Langley City. Last week, I joined the First Nations Education Steering Committee in the province of British Columbia to celebrate the new BC tripartite education agreement. It will benefit more than 12,000 First Nation students. It will provide important changes, including a more sufficient and sustained funding model for First Nations education and a new $20 million investment for First Nation schools, including for language and culture. It reflects the commitment of all parties to work together and strengthen First Nations control of First Nations education. Thank you.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
When you've inherited a family fortune like the Prime Minister, you never have to worry about paying for anything, including a carbon tax. Yet, as families and seniors struggle every month just to get by, government documents show the carbon tax will be 15 times higher if the Liberals are re-elected. That's up to $5,000 per family of 4. Canadian families are already paying for the Prime Minister's mistakes. Why won't he tell Canadians the truth about his plan to raise the carbon tax if he's elected?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, it's really unfortunate that conservative politicians continue to peddle misinformation. We have been clear that we're going to tackle climate change. We're going to do it in a way that it's effective and also affordable. I'm very proud to tell the member opposite that guess what? A family of 4 will get $307 in Ontario, more than they will pay. That has been our approach. But the question is, does the party opposite understand that climate inaction has a huge cost, that they're passing that cost to their kids, that climate change is real, and that that Canadians deserve a plan? We're going to continue moving forward on our plan to make.
The honourable member for Lethbridge.
The Prime Minister keeps telling Canadians, don't worry, it's okay. But okay for whom? Well, it's okay for him, because he inherited a family fortune, of course. Right. So he's fine. He's fine, everyone. Meanwhile, government document that just revealed that the carbon tax will increase by 15 times after the next election. Now, the Prime Minister won't be honest about this because it's before the election, but it's the Canadians after the election that we're concerned about. Mr. Speaker, why is the Prime Minister deceiving Canadians by covering up the true cost of the Liberal carbon tax until after the election?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Again, the misinformation that's being spread by conservative politicians from Premier Ford to the Leader of the Opposition is appalling. Let's be clear. In fact, I am happy to go and point the legislation that we passed that the Conservatives voted against because they want it to be free to pollute, that shows that we are giving all the money back. And guess what? A family in Ontario family of 4 will get $307, more than they will pay. We are focused on making life affordable. We are also focused on protecting the environment. The party opposite wants to take us back to the Harper days where they didn't protect the
Order. The honourable member for Niagara West.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 7 months since the Prime Minister backed down to Donald Trump and agreed to a trade deal that will keep steel and aluminum tariffs in place and continue to hurt our manufacturers. The Liberals have already collected over $839 million in retaliatory tariffs. Wow. They promised to give this money back to our struggling steel and aluminum producers, but almost none has gone out. Why are Canadian businesses continuing to be forced to pay for this Prime Minister's mistakes?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear about supporting the steel sector and the steel workers. We put forward a $2 billion support package for those steel workers. And just to be specific, Mr. Speaker, $664 million of financial support has been provided to the steel workers and the steel sector, Mr. Speaker. We've invested in Algoma, we've invested in ArcelorMittal, we provided financing through EDC and BDC, and will continue to support the steel workers and the steel sector.
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the government has collected almost $1 billion in counter-tariffs, but the Liberals have released only a fraction of the $2 billion in promised support for steel and aluminum. And what's more, everyone knows we produce the greenest steel and aluminum in the world. Another broken promise. Why do companies in the Saguenay and Canada have to keep paying for the Prime Minister's failed bargaining? The Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear. Steel is very important to our economy.
Invested $2 billion worth of support for this sector. As I've highlighted, we've provided that support in a meaningful way, particularly to the small and medium-sized businesses that need the financing in terms of being able to compete going forward. We provided $255 million through BDC, $169 million through EDC, and $140 million to the Strategic Innovation Fund. We'll continue to defend the steel workers and the steel sector, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, we're now 3 weeks into the state of emergency in Cat Lake, and the minister has yet to meet with the leadership or visit the community, so I'm not sure if he fully understands the seriousness on the ground. The need for ground heaters, holding tanks, standby generators, 120 emergency units that have to be moved up before the winter road goes out. So yesterday, he told the House that his officials who haven't yet visited the community are expecting a, quote, community-based solution. A community that is facing a total and complete breakdown of social infrastructure? What on earth is he talking about?
Minister of Indigenous Services.
Speaker, I have spoken to the leadership to affirm our commitment to working with them, and indeed we do want it to be a community-led solution because we know that is a solution that will be lasting. I did tell this House that officials would be meeting with the community yesterday or today, but they were unable to make it in due to bad weather, but they will be meeting with them, and they are in constant contact with them, and we are committed to developing not only an interim but a long-term plan of action to take on the housing challenges that we know that they face. Thank you, Mr.
Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spoke with the chief this morning. He said this government has done, quote, squat. We have houses that are so toxified that 75% of this community needs to be demolished. We just had a child medevaced out to London because of mold contamination. The officials in his department have ignored the crisis at Cat Lake for years, so sending them up to put a Band-Aid solution isn't going to cut it. So what's it going to be? Are we going to see leadership from this minister? More jargon from Indian Affairs, or an admission that his department has failed the people of Cat Lake, that he's going to take responsibility and he's going to make sure that action happens? Yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Health and safety of the people in Cat Lake is immensely important. I have spoken to the chief on this issue. I have spoken to members of council on this issue. We will be meeting with leadership to develop an interim and a long-term solution. We have made immense progress. We have, in partnership with the community, we know there is a long way to go, and we will continue forward in a spirit of partnership. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. A new year, a new House of Commons chamber, but the same old Liberal broken record. The Liberals' true colours are showing clearly in Quebec. They pretend they're listening, but they ignore Quebec's demands. The Prime Minister is rejecting the consensus in Quebec around a single tax return and is dead set against making life easier for Quebecers on the pretext of potential tax evasion. What's the real reason for the Prime Minister's latest refusal to listen to Quebec? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Once again, we see the Conservatives. We see how petty their politics is. They obviously have no real intention of respecting the work of our workers in Quebec. Those workers are an economic driver in regions like Shawinigan, the Gaspé, Rimouski, Quebec City, Montreal. These federal workers, Mr. Speaker, meet the needs. They're bilingual. They can respond to all Canadians' inquiries. We are going to continue to work with them. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Wow, did I just hear the minister try to scare Quebecers? We're talking about an administrative arrangement here, a single form instead of two, making the painstaking chore of filing your tax return simpler for Quebecers. Only in Quebec are there two tax returns, but Quebecers don't have two pockets, one for the feds and one for the province. They only get one paycheck and two governments want to take it. Enough's enough, Mr. Speaker. When's the Prime Minister going to finally get it, that Quebecers are not a threat, and give the single tax return the go-ahead? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, it's quite strange to hear the Conservatives opposite. They were in power for 10 years. Why do they not understand how things work at CRA? I can tell you that we are working to put programs in place to combat tax evasion, but tax evasion from the Conservative point of view is something that shouldn't be. We shouldn't touch their wealthy crony friends. We've invested $1 billion. We've hired 1,300 auditors. We've taken every step possible to fight tax evasion, and we're going to continue working on that. The Honourable Member for Mégantic l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, this government doesn't trust Quebecers. They stubbornly want to make life more costly for Quebecers and also harder for them. The Prime Minister is completely ignoring the consensus in Quebec around a single tax return. I know. The Prime Minister has never done his own taxes. Unlike thousands of Quebecers who can't all afford an accountant to do it for them. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Prime Minister make life easier for Quebecers by allowing a single tax return? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are making unrealistic promises, but I'm happy to tell all Canadians what we've done at Canada Revenue Agency to make life easier for Quebecers and Canadians. We've invested in our call centres. We've simplified the tax return form. We've invested in community volunteer programs. We've encouraged people to file their tax return, and that is with a view to making sure that all Canadians get their fair share. The Honourable Member for Vimy. Mr. Speaker, as the member for Vimy, I have the good fortune of having many Canadian Armed Forces members and a 22nd Regiment Reserve unit right in my riding. Every year, several recruits train and get their basic training there.
Join the reserve to get a good paying summer job and hone their leadership skills. Can the Minister of National Defence inform the House on how our government is investing in young Canadians and the Canadian Army Reserves?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from Vimy for her important question and her hard work for her constituents. That's right, applaud. I was proud to be in Quebec, Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago to talk about our new full-time summer employment program for members of the reserves. Through this initiative, new recruits will receive guaranteed summer employment, competitive pay, and gain valuable military experience, and all this guaranteed for the first 4 years. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to supporting the reserve members of our Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Canadians are paying for the Prime Minister's failures on China and national security. Chinese law requires any Chinese company to spy for the government, and Huawei's no exception. The U.S., Australia, New Zealand, and Japan have banned Huawei. The U.S. has threatened to withdraw intelligence sharing if Canada doesn't do the same. Cyber intelligence is the new arms race, and it's escalating. The U.S. has now brought 13 criminal charges against Huawei and is unwavering in its extradition request. When will this Prime Minister ban Huawei?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member should know, the issue of safety and security in the supply chains for new technologies are under very careful examination by the Government of Canada. All Canadians want to take advantage of the world of improvements that can come from the application of 5G technology. At the same time, we want to be absolutely certain that our systems are safe and secure, and Canadians can be confident that the decisions made by the Government of Canada will not in any measure sacrifice safety and security. For Vancouver East.
This Liberal government continues to devalue the contributions of parents and grandparents. First, it was family reunification based on the luck of the draw. After scrapping that colossal failure, it was right back to the Conservative plan to make families race at breakneck speeds just to submit an application before an arbitrary cap is reached. It took all of 11 minutes yesterday before the door was slammed shut. Now families have to wait another year to even have a shot at submitting an application. Will this Liberal government do what is right and cancel?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Canadians asked us for a more fair system, a system that would treat everyone on a first-come, first-served basis. We have quadrupled the number of spots available for permanent residents and Canadians to sponsor parents and grandparents from 5,000 to 20,000. We've slashed the wait times. It used to take 7 to 8 years to sponsor parents and grandparents. We've listened to Canadians and we continue to improve the program. We're proud of our record and we'll continue to reunite families, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is investing in renewable energy technologies to reduce carbon emissions and create good middle-class jobs for Canadians. Can the Minister of Natural Resources provide this House with an update on solar energy project he recently announced in Suffield, Alberta?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. Order.
I thank the member for Calgary Centre for his question and for his hard work. Mr. Speaker, last week we announced $15 million worth of investment our government is making in the Suffield solar project in Alberta. This project will create 250 well-paying middle-class jobs during construction and power over 7,000 homes every year. Mr. Speaker, we are delivering on our plan to grow the economy, at the same time protect the environment.
Order. I encourage members to hold their opinions until it's their time to speak, not to speak like member for Calgary Signal Hill, for example. You could do that.
The Honourable Member for Richmond North Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, it's been 7 months since people in my riding have had no answer about the special status of the Liberal member. He announced that he was resigning. In September, he changed his mind. In November, he said on his Facebook page that he would be retiring on January 22nd, and we just learned officially that he was leaving. Unfortunately, people in Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel have been paying for this MP's 7-month absence, and it's only getting longer. So my question is for the Prime Minister, does he intend to call a by-election before the end of this government's term? Because members of that riding will be without an MP for over 17 months otherwise. The Honourable Member, Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, as the member knows, only today did the member in question announce that he's no longer a member. So we will study the situation and move forward in due course appropriately. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. Mr. Speaker, what we want in Quebec is to integrate our new arrivals. We want those who choose Quebec to take part in Quebec society. We want them to make our culture their own. To do that, we have to be able to communicate. In Quebec, there is one official language, and that language is French. Does the minister agree that in order to become a citizen in Quebec, you must have an adequate knowledge of French? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we recognize here the Bloc's divisive tactics. They're trying to make language and culture a point of division. But Quebec is moving forward. Canadians are moving forward. The only people who are not moving forward and never will is the Bloc Québécois. The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. Mr. Speaker, I'm losing. I don't know what to say. We know that, member. I had the honor of tabling a bill requiring an adequate knowledge of French to get citizenship in Quebec. Knowledge of French is essential to integrate those who choose to join us, those who choose to be a part of us, those who want to be us, and the government of Quebec gets it. Is this government in favor of legislation requiring an adequate knowledge of French in order to get citizenship in Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. That's the thing, Mr. Speaker. That's the problem. Because their us is divisive. They want to divide us on the basis of language. Our Quebec includes Anglophones and Francophones and everyone who joins us. They want a better future for their children, and here on this side of the House, we do not divide, we include. Order. Order.
Member for Order. honourable member for Calgary Skyview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite selling our oil at discounted prices, the oil and gas industry last year contributed $117 billion to the Canadian economy. That's lots of money, Mr. Speaker. But the number could have been even higher had we had the pipeline capacity to deliver our oil to other markets. We need the Trans Mountain pipeline now more than ever. CNRL is warning that they will have to lay off workers, and how many other companies will be following suit. My question is to the Minister of Natural Resources. What is the timeline for getting the construction underway on the Trans Mountain pipeline? Are we close? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians understand that in order to continue to grow our economy and get our resources to non-U.S. markets, pipeline capacity is very, very important. We are moving forward on the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion in a responsible way, in the right way, with meaningful consultation with Indigenous communities, at the same time making sure that we are dealing with the impact of tanker traffic on the marine environment. We have 8 teams currently consulting with Indigenous communities, and NEB is on track to provide this report on February 22nd, and we are moving forward in the right way on this project, Mr. Speaker.
I would like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of the recipients of the 2018 Governor General's History Awards. It is a long list, so bear with me, please, and stand as I call the names. Jonathan Chassé, Cara Picard, Léa Baptiste, Pat Watson, Eric Chassé, Thomas Frecker, Jean-François Gosselin, Lisul Gunderman, Maxine Hildebrandt, Paul Patterson, Sarah Pashagumskum, Deborah Dobbins, Jean-Paul Gier, Sergio Gutierrez, Elizabeth Heeman, Bill Weiser. Yeah, I know.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, I think that if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion. That the House denounce the use of the tragedy, images from the tragedy of Lac-Megantic, and require that Netflix withdraw from its books the reference to this tragedy and financially compensate Lac-Megantic for having used these images for entertainment purposes without regard for the victims. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the honourable member have unanimous consent of the House to move the motion?
D'accord.
The House has heard the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion?
Adopté.
Carried.
The honourable member for Carleton is rising on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for me to table in this House a document entitled Modelling of Pricing and Emissions Reductions. This document from Environment Canada shows the government's plan is to increase the tax to $300 a ton, not the $50 they admit to, which will mean much higher taxes for Canadians. I depose it here. Thank you.
Is there unanimous consent for tabling the matter with unanimous consent?
Order. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, I believe that if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the tabling of the following